How can we live a more creative and spirit-filled life and have that as part of our toolbox, our environmental toolbox that we pass on to the people around us and to the next generation? This is a question that lives with me all the time. I'm a teacher and an artist. And so I really, and I'm also a steward. And I really care about that intersection of creativity, spirituality, and conservation. How do these things intertangle? Without our biosphere's immense and complex system of ecosystem services, humans would not last long. We have evolved within them and have given ourselves stewardship for good or ill over them. As humans have expanded to densely occupy many areas of the planet, the biosphere has become fragmented and degraded to both our and nature's loss. But one of the gifts of humanity is a conscience, and that conscience has inspired people. Long before Rachel Carson, whose book Silent Spring inspired the Environmental Policy Act of 1970, to work together to protect what's left. A history of the global environmental movement is a talk for another day, but I just wanted to remind us that we stand on the shoulders of giants whose empathy for remnant nature helped raise awareness of its importance and continues to inspire us today. What is remnant nature? We often consider it as an area of land that has not been disturbed by roads, agriculture, or other human-made hardscape. But Jerry Wilhelm tells us, but it's really something greater than that. It is a post-settlement change in the relationship between people and place. For the 12,000 or so more years, our landscape has been stewarded and sustained by humans in consilience with the land and all the plants and animals in it, whom they considered brothers and sisters, part of their extended family, and upon whom they depended. The local native plants and animals, long adapted to that relationship, have been orphaned by a people essentially now oblivious to them. These places where these native plants and animals still reside in a relationship with land stewards and people who care are remnants of that long ago culture. So children who become acquainted with the awe and wonder of nature and the miracle of the remnant can be inspired by both nature and art to become among those who care. The February 6th edition of the Washington Post declared Americans have transformed 95% of the natural landscapes in the country. Around half of the lower 48 states are now cities and streets, infrastructure such as airports and shopping centers, or isolated habitat fragments, with farms covering much of the other half. The $54,000 questions are, who will care for these remnant spaces in the future? And how do we get and keep young people interested and involved in their care? And how do we find and identify these young people? How do we best make the land's story theirs too? And this facing the realization that universities are defunding botany classes, herbaria, all the organismal biology classes. We all need to know that what is living in these remnant spaces. So how can we study the ecology of a place if we cannot identify the organisms within it? Luther's Standing Bear, 1868 to 1939, tells us man's heart away from nature becomes hard. We, the Lakota, knew that lack of respect for growing living things soon led to a lack of respect for humans too. And that's from that book, Richard Louv, Last Child in the Woods. Fortunately, in our region, there are a number of organizations sponsoring art, nature, and conservation connections for youth and their families. Chicago Wilderness's Leave No Child Inside initiative was based on Richard Louv's Last Child in the Woods rallying cry to combat nature deficit disorder. In September 2006, the National Conservation Training Center and the Conservation Fund hosted the National Dialogue on Children and Nature in Shepherdstown, West Virginia. The conference drew some 350 people from around the country, representing educators, healthcare experts, recreation companies, residential developers, urban planners, conservation agencies, academics, and other groups. Even the Walt Disney Company was represented. Support has also come from religious leaders, liberal and conservative, who understand, or who have understood, that all spiritual life begins with a sense of wonder, and that one of the first windows to wonder is the natural world. Christians should take the lead in reconnecting with nature and disconnecting from machines, wrote R. Albert Muller Jr., then president of the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, the flagship school of the Southern Baptist Convention. And that's from Orion magazine about Leave No Child Inside. As a science affiliate at the Field Museum, I should probably mention their work first. Quoting from their own material, the Field Museum Youth and Family Conservation programs have grown to be a nationally recognized model of conservation education that has directly reached over 37,000 students through its lifespan. The Keller Science Action Center at the Field Museum, as well as We Dig Bio and Collections Club events, attract many families to science and nature-based programming. The Field Museum's Roots and Routes initiatives and Youth Conservation Action lead the Chicago Green Ambassador Summer Program, which is a paid internship program to increase the resilience of our neighborhoods and green spaces. Students ages 15 to 22 are recruited from the neighborhoods of Chinatown, Bronzeville, Little Village, Pilsen, and surrounding communities, with a focus of keeping their communities connected to the Burnham Wildlife Corridor, which is the south lakefront from McCormick Place to 47th Street, through real-world environmental and community issues. And I am assured, excuse me, I'm assured that they do this and include arts-based programming. Participants create connections among these neighborhoods and Southside national areas, while also helping to empower community groups to adopt sustainability values. They are becoming stewards not only of nature in their community, but champions of a process of neighborhood renewal. The Roots and Routes Initiative and Youth Conservation Action Program are part of the Keller Science Action Center at the Field Museum, and they appreciate your support. In addition, quarterly We Dig Bio events run by Dr. Matt Von Conrad, who's head of collections, brings in family, teens, and college students to help process specimens, transcribe label data, and enjoy behind-the-scenes tours of portions of their 4 million plus collections. Interested members of the general public are welcome to attend too, and bonus points if you're fluent at reading cursive. Mighty Acorns, which is also supported by the Field Museum, has worked together with local schools and landowners to provide program experiences to over 130,000 students in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grades throughout the program's history. My son was a part of that, and now he runs a summer camp up in Wisconsin. Brushwood Center at Ryerson Woods works collaboratively with community partners, artists, healthcare providers, and scientists to improve health equity and access to nature in Lake County, Illinois. They engage people with the outdoors through the arts, environmental education, and community action. Brushwood Center's programs focus on youth, families, military veterans, and those facing racial and economic injustice. They also host botanical artist Keon Kim's multi-level class for the dedicated student of that discipline. Emily Oaks Nature Center in Skokie has a 13-acre woodland with an after-school nature club, family programming, nature and art-based half to full day preschool, all of these incorporating art elements. Cool Learning Experience Pathways to Possibilities program helps connect Waukegan area youth to nature, helping them reflect deeply and build their confidence and create meaningful digital stories. They host a community celebration every year where students share their artwork and photography inspired by a 6-word memoir describing their feelings, thinking, and physical responses when in contact with the natural environment. Their Heart to Heart Letter program is a conversation between each student and a personified plant or animal to offer stories with a moral theme. The Chicago Park District's Young Cultural Stewards program engages art, technology, and media to inspire them to become advocates and caretakers of their parks, neighborhoods, and communities. YCS has engaged over 2,500 youth across 100 parks and 45 neighborhoods through community-based programming, including TRACE, which is Teens Reimagine Art, Community, and Environment, Inferno Mobile Studio, and YCS Fellowship and Artsy Mobile Creative Play. For specific nature art classes, it would be remiss to not mention the teachers of the Chicago Botanic Garden, notably professional scientific illustrators Nancy Halliday and Marlene Hill Donnelly, who offer excellent botanical drawing classes. But at about $300 to $450 for each 5 or 6 session class, they may be out of the reach of many families. For the dedicated student of botanical art, however, they are well worth the investment. They're excellent teachers, and I've studied with both of them at Morton Arboretum. I also want to put in a note about Morton Arboretum, and because they have youth programming and also nature camps for kids, and I've been assured that they do incorporate art elements into that, which I wasn't aware of. They also offer a couple of university level classes that are kind of a complement to the programming that the other universities have. And last year they took some kids to Costa Rica. The Peggy Notebart Nature Museum also has outdoor learning experiences. Some of it incorporates art, but I'm not sure to what extent. And this isn't meant to be, you know, totally comprehensive. These are just sort of the major players in arts and community in the Chicago region. For those adults and youth who prefer independent learning options, Cornell Lab offers reasonably priced online bird painting and nature journaling classes through the Cornell Academy. We can't not mention May Thielgard Watts. Well, have any of you heard of who or do you all know who she is? Okay. So May Thielgard Watts' book, Reading the Landscape of America, is one of the first illustrated guides to the ecology of our region and still one of the best. It is both beautifully written and illustrated. In just a few simple drawings, she was able to explain the difficult ecological concepts of her professor, Henry Chandler Coles, father of modern ecology. Henry Chandler Coles taught at the University of Chicago, and his work is seminal. So May was the first naturalist hired by Morton Arboretum, and they had a little it's called the Outpost. It was in Thornhill, and she taught generations and generations of naturalists, including my teacher at Morton, Jack Schuba. So I'm in a direct line of descent, genealogically in terms of nature education to May Thielgard Watts, and I think that's it's humbling, really. Also check her public tree finder books. There's Tree Finder, and there's a Tree Finder in Winter. And Rachel Carson, I found out, also illustrated children's nature books. I didn't know that until Jerry Wilhelm told me. I have brought a number of books kind of for show and tell for later that you can flip through. I'm a big fan of John Muir Laws. He is the author of a very well-respected volume on nature journaling, and that's over there on the table. He has some, I think, online classes as well. And while I'm on that topic, I should also mention Frederick Frank's The Awakened Eye and the Zen of Seeing. He was a colleague of the humanitarian Dr. Albert Schweitzer, and he found a deep spirituality in the process of drawing. He teaches a meditative approach in which you, the subject, can learn to develop a deep empathy, a resonance with the object you draw. While one can draw anything, really, he would bring his students out to observe the natural world, and he felt that was it was a spiritual experience that he felt he should give to his students. It's always best to draw from life, start with simple objects rather than from photographs. In photographs, you're limited by the lens's curvature and the ability to capture the detail, perspective, and most importantly, color. Frederick Frank, excuse me, reminds us that the gift of sight is priceless, and drawing directly from nature is the best teacher. Kathy Johnson has a gift for beautifully and gracefully simplifying complex subjects such as landscape. And I brought a few of her books as well. Much of her work also has some whimsy to it. When I grow up, I'd like to be able to see the world and paint it like Kathy Johnson. She's one of my heroes. Last year, CFN organizes stewardship, education, environmental justice, and community resilience events in underserved communities in the Chicago region, from Waukegan to Round Lake to Pilsen. One of their recent projects is studying the effects of beaver dams on local biodiversity in Manitou Creek. They also taught kids how to do a tree inventory, learning to identify the species, tabulate tree diameters, gather GIS data, and tag them for follow-up monitoring. One of the events I hope to partner with them this summer was to study and draw aquatic invertebrates under compound microscopes at my HOSA stewardship site in Zion or somewhere similar. The Land Conservancy of McHenry County hosts internships in natural areas stewardship. For the past several years, I've offered free annual workshops to their interns on how to see and draw plants based on my field museum publication, Common Plant Families of the Chicago Region, and the Illustrated Glossary to Flora of the Chicago Region. Both of those and other of my publications are in the pink binder over there. In 2023, they came out to Wolf Road Prairie in Westchester, Illinois, to experience a completely different site and learn some of its long history, in addition to drawing some of the native flora with me. Art supplies are considered expensive. And it's all too easy to make excuses for why we can't afford the time or the resources to be creative. But we can make wonderful art with simple materials. So don't think you need the most expensive materials to be productive. And don't be that person that buys all the coolest materials, the newest materials, and then lets them sit in their closet. And don't be that person. Famous bird artist Louis Agassiz Fuertes, when informed that the bag with his art supplies had been lost in transit from England to Ethiopia, just went to a local Ethiopian market, bought a children's watercolor set, and pressed on with his work, which was a comprehensive flora of Ethiopia. Oops. Artists usually need a why to draw and paint, unless it's already compelling from within. My why was native orchid conservation. One of my paintings was featured in the exhibit Losing Paradise, Endangered Plants Here and Around the World. This exhibit opened at the Missouri Botanic Garden, then went to the Chicago Botanic Garden, then the New York, then the National Museum of Natural History at the Smithsonian, and then finally to Kew Gardens, London. The painting was also featured in the magazine Smithsonian in Your Classroom, which was distributed to schools all over the United States. I have to thank my son, Ian, over here, for all the support he's given these various ventures over the years. We attended the Chicago Botanic Garden, Mobot, and Smithsonian openings together. He had introduced me to the world of digital art when I was working on a project for liturgy training publications while he was still in high school, and has still been very supportive of my artwork throughout his life. He gave me a Wacom tablet for Christmas. Wow. I have a fairly long history in Chicago's arts communities, but not all of it was botanical. In 1984, I was elected the second woman president of the Palette and Chisel Academy of Fine Arts in Chicago's Gold Coast, and successfully resolved their dispute with the Cook County Board of Appeals over property tax matter that following year. Nobody else wanted to be president. They made me do it. No, I'm serious. In 1987, my son was born, and I spent the ensuing years raising him. In 2001, I joined Plants of Concern, and a few years later, proved my passion for botanical art by completing the certificate program in scientific illustration at Morton Arboretum, which they don't have anymore. In 2007, I was invited to be artist in residence at the Oak Park Conservatory, where I developed sets of educational botanical materials for their visitors. In 2012, the American Society of Botanical Artists, which had co-sponsored Losing Paradise, awarded me an educational grant to bring botanical art education to new and what I call unsuspecting audiences. This award funded 7 workshops cited all over the region, provided over 70 sets of artist quality materials for people of all ages, abilities, and backgrounds to take home to continue their observations of nature. It was a lot of fun for me. That was also the year Common Plant Families in the Chicago region was first published. It's been downloaded over 10,000 times. In 2017, the Forest Preserves of Cook County appointed me their first artist in residence, drawing at different preserves, hosting a watercolor pencil class at Camp Bullfrog Lake, and creating a block print at the cabin where I stayed that summer. The Nature Conservancy also commissioned a series of educational bandanas to give to their restoration workday volunteers. Art has the capacity to translate complex subjects into ideas that are beautiful and easily comprehensible. So it's important to nurture the arts in both education and our personal lives. Scientists and engineers spend time drawing as a way of seeing what they need to learn to see and understand. Everyone should have the opportunity to do this and to give themselves permission each day to make the time to be creative. And there's a joy, an inner release in expressing our creativity in many forms. It's a spiritual as well as an aesthetic outlet. My publications have been used by many regional organizations for teaching their students, interns, and volunteers. The Field Museum, the Joint Masters Program between the Chicago Botanic Garden and Northwestern University, the Forest Preserves of Cook County, and various restoration contractor companies, including Pizzo and Associates. In 2019, we applied to present to the Roots and Shoots Conference in Chicago, sponsored by Dr. Jane Goodall. Nikki Strahl, Carolyn Cullen, and Carolyn's daughter, Mary, and I staffed our table, and Mary gave a talk about her work with monarch butterflies. It was a very exciting day for all. In 2021, the American Society of Botanical Artists funded more botanical outreach and an exhibit around orchid awareness and conservation through the Juliet Kirby Award. My topic was the orchids of the Chilwaukee-Waukegan Beach Ridge Plain, a regional biodiversity hotspot. There's 22 species of orchids there for work. This grant, combined with one from the Volunteer Stewardship Network of the Nature Conservancy of Illinois, provided over 50 sets of artist quality materials and handouts for participants to take home after the 7 classes, which were for adults, teens, and children, for the spaced out over the spring and summer of 2022. Every year since that first ASBA grant in 2012, my art business has funded at least one additional workshop annually, providing materials for up to 15 people to take home to continue their studies in either Lake, Cook, or McHenry County. People usually just like reach out to me and say, Kathy, would you do this? And I'll say, sure, but I can only afford to do one a year. We've also provided sets of materials to high school students in the Center for Conservation Leadership Program, sponsored by Lake Forest Open Lands Association. It's really exciting for me to see what these students notice and learn from the experiences. Last year, at the urging of Dr. Gerald Wilhelm, 2 microscopy classes were hosted at James Woodworth Prairie in Glenview to help people look more deeply at plants and their ecology. We had entomologist Terry Measley and botanist Kendall Winter as our lead microscopists, while I helped folks with their drawing. We had students from ages 15 to 65. Jerry Wilhelm even stopped in to visit one of the classes. For the past 5 years, he and I have collaborated to produce an illustrated glossary to flora of the Chicago region, which is a free download on the Conservation Research Institute website, as well as a series of genus level guides to our flora. Those are also in the pink binder here, if you want to take a look at them after the talk. Currently, we're working on another floristic guide. Right now it's Hypericums. Planning more microscopy classes and researching little-known Chicago area botanists, because why not? Last year, I took a short break from orchids and did an amaryllis series, of which you may see several here at the library. I love painting plants. What happened here? So what can you do? Okay, everybody wants the take home. It feels important to offer rich and engaging experiences, to meet folks where they are in life, to be inviting and inclusive. I hope some of the ideas and activities mentioned here spur all of you to thinking about how you and your community can reach out one-to-one to folks you know and explore the arts and nature. Music, writing, movement, there are so many wonderful emotional responses to the gifts nature provides for us. And I know with all the sculptures and public art here in Prospect Heights that supporting the arts is important to this community. I want to also mention, before I forget, that there's a Chicago Nature Journaling Club, which meets monthly on a weekend day at various sites through the area. And a third Saturday of each month, Artists at the Field, which is at the Field Museum, which invites folks to come draw at the museum. And they meet around 12:45 at the far end of the Bird Hall. For show and tell, and that's something that's been ongoing for about a couple of years, I think, since COVID had kind of wind down. I want to close with this quote from Rachel Carson. If a child is to keep alive his inborn sense of wonder, he needs the companionship of at least one adult who can share it, rediscovering with them the joy, excitement, and mystery of the world we live in. Let's make 2024 a year of outreach, inclusion, healing, significance, a gift to nature as well as to one another. I want to thank the library staff, Dana, Agnes, and the folks from the Prospect Heights Natural Resources Commission for inviting me to come here to speak to you, and for also beautifully curating and installing my exhibit. Thank you. If you have any questions, I'll take questions. Yes.
Kathleen, how do you, as an artist, how do you go about, when you look at something, and obviously it's extremely complex, but what is the process? I mean, I know you've refined this as we, progressed over the years, but what is the editing process that lets you simplify things so profoundly to just essence of what needs to be there? Really amazing.
Oh, thank you. Well, that's a really good question, because what I do is so opposite to what Kathy Johnson does in landscape painting. I've always wanted to be a landscape painter, okay? But a landscape painter has to take something that's extremely complex and to turn it into something simple and edit the information down. As a botanical illustrator, I get to look at and study every single detail and paint them. So I'm really just rendering what I see. But again, working from life is so important. Now, in some cases, like with the orchids, I wasn't working directly from life in most cases. I was working from dead plants. I was working from dried herbarium specimens. And there's a kind of complex process of mentally reconstituting that plant. There's also, you know, you can also study the plants in the field. Whenever I could, I studied plants in the field. I took my own photographs. I brought a sketchbook with some colored pencils or watercolors. I made color notes. This is all legitimate to do. But when, you know, like the purple fringed orchid study, they're rare. The habitat's very fragile. You don't want to be plopping your equipment all over the place. And where, you know, there's everything there is as rare as the orchids are. And besides, it's usually high mosquito season. So, in fact, Jerry, I think, was it in the flora or maybe plants in the Chicago region, Floyd Swink, I think it was plants in the Chicago region, Floyd Swink mentioned that the purple fringed orchid is found where the mosquitoes are thickest. And it's really true, I gotta tell you. So, but you try to find the line, so you find the line, and then you study the plant, you study the botanical details, you study where the leaf attaches, what does that look like? And what are the textures there? You spend a lot of time looking. And if you have, like many of the orchids, the tropical orchids I painted from life. So I would look at it, I would turn it around, I try to find its best angle. I play with the angle of the light, then I would draw it, and then I would change my mind. And then I usually draw on tracing paper, vellum, a good vellum tracing paper. And I use that once I finally said, yes, this is as good as it's gonna get. Then I transfer that to my white watercolor paper, and then I paint it. And by that time, I mean, I know it. I mean, it's sort of like when you drive someplace and you've been there many, many times, it's sort of like, it sort of paints itself.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. You find that as you progress, that your stylization become routine on the thing about it.
Well, no, you really have to analyze. You have to think about what's the color here, what's the value, where's the light hitting, what are the edges? Do we have hard edges, soft edges? There's a lot of detail.
It was like your lining illustrations, they're so succinct and simple. Is that a different process when you're just doing a simple line drawing?
I do those all digitally. So I'm gonna be 72 this year, and God bless digital tools, because I can make a line, I can draw a line, and I can make that line bend the way I want that line to, and then I can copy and paste that line and move it over, and then I've got a stem and then all the little stipple. It takes a long time. I mean, I think this Hypericum guy is probably going to be probably one of the most complicated ones I've done, because simply all the little stamens, we're talking about 50 stamens on some of these.
Are you using Illustrator?
I'm actually working in Photoshop, because Photoshop, I can make little dots and create brushes and stuff. But all the line illustrations were all done digitally. And I do work a lot in terms of getting the proportions and the shapes of things. I have research privileges at the Field Museum at Morton Arboretum. And so I work from the herbarium specimens. I'll go to the lab and I'll draw things under the microscope and feel like I know this plant. But a lot of study is important. And I've got to say, I am so disappointed in our educational system right now. When I went into high school, and I'm not going to say how long it was a really long time ago, I was told that I wanted to take botany, right? I really want to take botany. And they said, well, you can't take botany because last year was the last year we taught botany as a standalone. And then they said, well, why do you want to take 3 years of science anyway? You're not college material. Why don't you take typing and home ec instead? Well, I already knew, I already knew how by that time how to do laundry, dishes, and cook. And my mother was a medical secretary, and I saw what a joy-filled experience that was when she came home from work, just full of enthusiasm about her job. And I realized that wasn't going to be for me, but I didn't realize that being a scientific illustrator or botanical illustrator was even a thing. And there weren't any botany classes in the universities where I could actually commute. So I gave up. I mean, I just gave up on my artistic dream until I was in my late 20s, and life turned around. And that was actually when I stumbled into the palette chisel. Aren't you glad I did? I mean, that's kind of Maria Montessori talks about the inner teacher, and each one of us have this, right? It's that inner sense of this is what I need to do. And it's maybe not what your culture says to do, but each one of us has this, I call it the thread, that inner thread. Remember the thread, Theseus and Ariadne into the maze of the Minotaur. So you find that thread and you hold on to that thread, and it'll get you where you need to go. So that's part of the spiritual journey. I think a lot of this is this, again, going back to my original question, what is the spiritual part of this work of conservation and art? How do we make meaning? How do we give meaning to the world around us? How do we take meaning from our environment, distill it, make it something, life-giving to others? Any other questions?
Kathleen, we had one question from the chat. They wanted to know if you visited the orchid show this year.
I have not yet.
Okay.
I'm waiting until the Illinois Orchid Society has their show, and I usually go and see that because that's where all the really cool orchids are. Like the species. I mean, I'm a geek. I'm free to admit it. I'm an orchid geek. I will wear that banner. And so, yeah, so the growers, the local growers, the regional growers have some spectacular plants that they've spent all year coaxing into exhibit condition. So I'll go then. Thank you.
Where would I find the Illinois Orchid Show?
It's at the Chicago Botanic Garden.
Okay.
And it will be it should be in conjunction in one of the galleries. Usually it's in the greenhouse galleries and one of those other sets of rooms in the Regenstein Center. Yes,
Another
Tina.
question for you. How do you find time to do your work and stewardship as well?
I'm really good at time management. So I have a full-time job. I run a nature-based preschool from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday through Friday. I am steward at 2 sites, Hosa Park and Granger Woods. Hosa is in Zion, and it is a little teeny 23-acre biodiversity hotspot. We now have 62 species of lichens attributed to it, and 40 of those are confirmed. Hosa, we have 335 species of vascular plants attributed, and we're working on confirming them. And then Granger, we've got about 400 species on our species list. So I go there once a month. I should go more, but that's what I can do. And yeah, and then with the artwork, I do that at home during my evenings. And I just try to manage my time really well. That's all.
I have a comment and a question. My comment is, So if you're interested in, drawing nature, the library has a program in March. And, our teacher and book illustrator Terry Murphy is going to be here, and we're going to be drawing them off.
Nice.
And my question is, so do you grow, orchids? I've never been able to grow.
Well, most people love them to death. I saw my first orchid when I was 25 years old in the window of Minim, which was this little kind of I don't know, kind of cutting edge themed plant store in Chicago on Belmont and Halsted. And it was a white phalaenopsis, and I fell in love with that plant at first sight. I walked in there, I wanted to know everything there was about it. And I felt like I'd come home because the place was like a jungle. It wasn't like any kind of florist you've ever been. Well, certainly wasn't an Amlex. It was like a jungle. It was like walking into a conservatory. And I made friends with the folks who worked there. I mean, practically lived there. I ended up being a manager there for about a month, and I realized it wasn't going to pay my bills, but it was a wonderful job. Yeah, while I had it, I learned a lot, and I started collecting orchids. So I've been collecting orchids since I was 25, and I've killed a lot of them. Okay, I've killed a lot of them, not on purpose. The thing with orchids is they need high humidity and not a lot of moisture at the roots. And you need to know that the roots can photosynthesize too. So they need good aeration at the roots. That whole thing about ice cubes, don't put ice cubes in your orchids. But the principle of it is don't use a lot of water is sort of the goals. So what I do with my plants is I take them to the sink, I water them thoroughly, I let it drain out, I fertilize them a couple of times a year, maybe, very likely. And then I put them back in the window until they're almost bone dry. And that way they get the moisture that they need. And I repot them every couple of years. And you just give them enough light. They need light. They need lots of light, almost all of them. They're usually upper canopy plants. The orchids that we have in the Chicago region, there's 47 species of orchids that are have been attributed to the Chicago region, about 50-ish, maybe depending if you're a lump or a splitter in the species level and the variety level, there's about 52 for the whole state of Illinois. Those are all terrestrial orchids. We don't have any epiphytic orchids. The orchids that you get at like Trader Joe's and Home Depot, those are all epiphytic orchids. They grow on trees, or sometimes they grow on rocks. And so think of fast draining, loose substrate, lots of light, and then you should do fine. Just don't overwater them.
Trying to maintain humidity, especially during the winter.
Well, I just have a lot of plants, and so plants usually create their own little microclimate. And you can put on a humidifier, but some of them are really like picky. Phalaenopsis and Cattleyas and that alliance, I get more issues like with scale or sometimes spider mites. Thankfully, I haven't gotten spider mites in a long time, but scale can be a thing. So the humidity doesn't seem to be a problem, but then I probably have about 80 orchids and other plants, just myriads and ferns. I'm a collector. I'm a plant geek, I'm sorry. And just the way I'm a plant person. And some people, you know who you are. If you're a plant person, you know who you are, right? It's part of our DNA. Traditionally we stewarded nature. So this is just our little way of recapturing that original relationship we had that Jerry Wilhelm mentions earlier with nature. It's nurturing for us. as well as through the plants. It's something real. These plants are real and they respond to us when we give them good care. And our sites respond to us, our stewardship sites respond to us when we give them good care. But I always feel like as a steward, I get as much out of it as my site does, I think. It's like a dance. And it keeps you coming back. It's hard work, but it's worth it. If you have a garden, you know the joy you get out of it. You know, even if people, the joke goes, oh, well, I spent $30 on this tomato that I grew. You got the plant, you've got the fertilizer, you've got all the cage and all the things, and you get one tomato off this plant, right? So, but it's worth it. It's part of our spiritual life. And living a spirit-filled life, I think, is a life of authenticity and meaning is really what keeps us young and alive and it keeps us engaged with other people. No, not well. They say weed is a plant in the wrong place. I'm allergic to poison ivy. And so it's kind of ironic that I have 2 species of poison ivy at my one stewardship site. And one of my volunteers is super allergic to poison ivy and keeps threatening to quit. But doesn't, I bought him long elbow length leather gloves and rubber gloves. And then I said, well, if you need me to, I'll buy you some Carhartt overalls. Well, I mean, you do what you need to do. You're out there in the fray and it makes you feel good. You do what you need to do. But I am really allergic to poison ivy, not as allergic as our friend is. All plants are beautiful. Some of them just don't play well with others, like Phragmites and buckthorn. I'll tell you the buckthorn story. So we have like 2 more minutes, right? Heather, when I first became steward of HOSA, Heather Decker, who works for Lake Forest Open Lands now and was steward at Wilmot Woods, volunteer steward at Wilmot Woods, the Lake County Forest Preserves at the time, came out and she had all her PPE on, right? The helmet, the chaps, and the gloves, and the chainsaw. We took down this one big mama buckthorn. It was about, oh, it had to be about 6 inches and 6-7 inches in diameter, like that, multi-stemmed. She took that down with her saw. I brought, because it was in a sensitive dune and swale system, I brought down 2 tarps, 2 painting tarps. I put one on one side of the plant and one on the other, and she dropped it and we stripped all the berries off because I did not want a single buckthorn berry in that dune and swale system and that sensitive sand prairie. We got 2 gallons of berries off that one big mama buckthorn that was about 10 feet tall and 8 feet wide. And you do the math, okay? So let's see, 2 gallons of buckthorn. Let's say each buckthorn berry is a cc. Probably, you can probably get more buckthorn berries in a cc than that, but let's just say, for example, so how many cc's in a gallon? How many cc's in 2 gallons? Okay, so each buckthorn berry has 4 carpels. The carpel is that part that holds the seed. Let's say half the carpels will abort, or won't produce viable seeds. So how many buckthorn did we save the system from? I figured out the math. We probably saved the system from at least 18,000 buckthorn seedlings. No, I'm not kidding. I sat down and I did the math. And I'm like, whoa. Oh, no wonder there's so much buckthorn here now. And so it was gone. We treated it, we cut it, it was in October, we cut it, I treated it, and then the lake basically washed that section of dune away a few years later. But it felt good while we did it, you know, and so that we just stay at it. But, you know, I don't, just like bullies, I don't think plants are psychopaths. Like maybe some human beings might be. But they definitely can be bullies. They are not in healthy consilience with their natural area. What we've moved them around. We've taken them out of their original habitat where there were actually things that ate them, where they were part of the system. So we've, you know, in our sort of area, our hubris, have played God with our natural areas and our gardens, and then these things have escaped to the natural areas, and then they take over because they don't have anything that eats them that's in relationship. So that's a much of a cultural deficit of our own is we can't follow the plants on. But no, there are new plants that I really dislike. I don't like yellow jackets. We had yellow jackets in the wall of my house last year. No, unless they're paying rent. I don't want it. If you're in my house, you have to pay rent. That's the rule. So yeah, so here, you know, get outside, encourage wonder, set a good example with your own creative journey. Get out there, just draw what you see. You don't have, it doesn't have to be, everybody says, well, I can't even draw a stick figure. Man, we're not drawing stick figures, you're gonna draw a leaf. Look at a leaf. Look at where the leaf joins a stem. Is there an axillary bud or is there not an axillary bud? Just document what you see. Collaborate. And focus on the good. Oh my gosh, you know, we can look at the news and there's so much bad news, but if you focus on the good, it makes you feel better and everybody around you. Not to say we're not going to be Pollyannas, but we have to keep that in mind. So the curse of being a steward, and why I always say focus on the good, the curse of being a steward is driving down the roadways and you see all the buckthorn and you say, but then you go to your own site and say, okay, my circus, my monkeys, I'm going to deal with it here. And hopefully, you know, through the educational materials that have helped develop and other people help develop and all the work that you do, spreading the good word, will create a culture of conservation that will help restore our habitats, our natural remnants back to good health. And that will help our spiritual relationship with nature, as well as help nature itself. Yeah, they're all for sale. My amaryllis are all for sale. And I painted some little minis of them, and those are going, I painted 9 little minis on these little panels. My friend Elaine Luther talked me into doing this, even though I got like all this other stuff going on. And they're going to be at the Garrett Museum of Art in Garrett, Indiana next month. The opening is in the end of March. So I had 17 of the amaryllis paintings at the Wakanda Public Library, and then I was invited to exhibit here, and I just think they're nice. I'm really enjoying the amaryllis series. But I paint orchids, and then one of my things is I want to paint all the orchids of Illinois. I haven't quite finished all of them, but I think I'm at least halfway through. There's like 50 of them. And then that'll be an interesting exhibit to have, right? The Dunesland show hung up at the Ridges last year. And I'll be teaching a nature journaling class on how to make a nature journal and then filling it up at the Ridges Festival of Nature and Memorial Day weekend this year. So I do a lot of that stuff. I do. This is the only scheduled show I have right now, besides the one at the Garrett Museum. I sort of wait for people to say, Kathy, would you hang a show? Because it's a lot of work to put together a show. But I enjoy doing it, and I've hung my work at the Oak Park Public Library, the Oak Park Conservatory a couple times. And I said the Ridges last year, that was nice. That was a whole summer. And then I'm not sure how long this one's gonna be for. I have to before I leave, I have to check what the takedown date is. But if you know other opportunities, I'm happy to, consider doing that. I have a website. My son updated my website. The new website address is camgfinearts.com. And so that has the Dunesland exhibit on it and some historic work. Right now I'm working on a digital app for the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill for plant ID. And those are like little digital icons, the little teeny, like 1-inch square things of different, like sort of a mini version of the illustrated glossary. Just like zooming in on the most high focus elements that need to be described. That's a big thing I'm doing. And then I got a project on in the hopper to do some renderings of karst cave systems. And that's a little bit out of my comfort zone, but it might be a fun project. And those are for money. Orchid paintings, I paid for the amaryllis paintings. I painted those for love. There's stuff you do for love, and there's stuff that you do to. But yeah, so the amaryllis paintings. I was just at the conservatory, Mitchell Park Domes in Milwaukee. Have you been there? They have so many cool plants there, and so they're trying to fundraise to repair the domes. And so I said, well, 10% of any of the sales that I get from the amaryllis will go back to the Mitchell Park Conservatory, because why not?